The rain of broken metal slowly drifted across the black sky of Sector 9. Far away from Earth, beyond the trade routes and military zones, an old research station floated silently in deep space. Its lights were dead, its engines cold, and its metal walls covered with burn marks from a terrible battle. For 20 years, nobody had gone near the station. People feared it. Stories about missing ships and strange signals turned the place into a ghost zone. Tonight, one human ship finally stopped beside it. The heavy military cruiser Atlas moved carefully through the darkness while warning alarms quietly echoed across its bridge. Captain Elias Ward stood near the front window with his arms crossed, watching the abandoned station through the glass. He was a tall man with tired eyes and old battle scars across his face. The crew respected him because he stayed calm even when death was close. But tonight, even Elias felt uneasy. "Signal check," he ordered quietly. A young officer looked at the screen. "Still receiving the same emergency beacon, sir." "How old?" Elias asked. The officer swallowed nervously. "Almost 19 years old." The bridge became silent. Nobody liked hearing that. A distress signal repeating for 19 years could only mean one thing. Something terrible happened there. Elias grabbed his helmet from the command table. "Prepare the boarding team," he said. "We go inside." Several crew members exchanged worried looks. One soldier finally spoke. "Sir?" "People say the station was doing illegal experiments." Another muttered softly. "They say the scientists created monsters here." Elias looked back at them calmly. "Stories don't kill people," he answered. "Fear does." Minutes later, the boarding shuttle slowly entered the station through a damaged landing gate. The metal doors screamed loudly as they opened. Cold air rushed inside like the station itself was breathing after a long sleep. Elias stepped out first with 6 armed soldiers behind him. Darkness covered the giant hallway ahead. Only a few red emergency lights still worked, making the station glow like a dying machine. Every footstep echoed through the empty corridors. The air smelled old, burned, and rotten. One soldier aimed his flashlight toward the walls. Strange claw marks covered the metal. Another found broken security robots scattered across the floor, ripped apart like toys. "Stay alert," Elias warned quietly. The deeper they walked, the stranger the station became. Doors opened and closed by themselves. Computer screens flickered for only a second before dying again. Somewhere far away, metal banged loudly against metal. Then silence returned. One nervous soldier whispered, "I don't like this place." Nobody answered him. Suddenly, their radios exploded with static. Loud screeching filled their helmets, making several soldiers grab their heads in pain. "What was that?" One shouted. Before Elias could answer, every light in the hallway turned off. Complete darkness swallowed them. For 3 long seconds, nobody moved. Then the emergency lights slowly returned, flickering weakly above them, and that was when they heard it. A soft sound, very small. Someone crying. The soldiers froze immediately. The crying echoed through the hallway again, weak and frightened. Not an animal, not a machine, a child. One soldier looked horrified. There's no way a child survived here. But Elias was already moving toward the sound. The crying led them deep into the lower research levels where huge metal doors blocked the path. The words on the wall were almost erased. But one line could still be read clearly. Project Lyra. The giant laboratory door slowly opened with a loud hiss. Inside, the room was massive. Broken glass covered the floor. Destroyed computers sparked against the walls. Dead scientists still sat near their control stations like frozen ghosts. At the center of the room stood a tall glass chamber glowing faint blue, and inside it was a little girl. She looked no older than 8 years old. Long silver hair rested across her shoulders. Small wires covered her arms like veins made from metal. Her eyes were closed, and tears slowly rolled down her face while she cried softly in her sleep. The soldiers stared at her in complete shock. "That's impossible," one whispered. Suddenly, the chamber opened by itself. Cold smoke poured onto the floor. The girl's glowing blue eyes slowly opened. At the exact same moment, every weapon carried by the soldiers suddenly activated on its own. Rifles lifted into the air. Safety locks disengaged automatically. Warning alarms screamed through the laboratory. One terrified soldier shouted, "She's controlling the weapons." Several soldiers aimed their guns directly at the girl, but she did not attack. She looked terrified, confused and weak, like she had never seen another living person before. The little girl slowly stepped out of the chamber with shaking legs. Then she looked directly at Captain Elias Ward. For a second, the entire room became completely silent. The glowing machines, the alarms, the fear. Everything faded behind her small voice. "Please," she whispered softly, her eyes filled with tears again. "Don't leave me alone again." The warning siren screamed across the human ship only seconds after the rescue team returned from the abandoned station. Red emergency lights flashed through every hallway of the cruiser Atlas. Crew members ran between control panels while officers shouted orders across the bridge. Something was following them. Captain Elias Ward stood beside the main command screen while the ship scanners searched the darkness behind them. Then the radar officer suddenly froze. "Captain," he whispered nervously, "multiple ships just appeared behind us." The bridge became silent. Elias looked at the screen carefully. 5 black warships slowly moved through space like giant predators hunting wounded prey. Their hulls carried no military flags, no trade symbols, nothing. Only one mark glowed across the front of each ship. A silver eye. One crew member stepped backward immediately. "No," he muttered. "It's the Hollow Fang mercenaries." Several officers looked terrified after hearing the name. The Hollow Fang were not normal soldiers. They were hunters. They worked for the highest bidder, destroyed entire colonies for money, and never left witnesses alive. Elias narrowed his eyes. How did they find us so fast? Nobody answered, but slowly. Everyone on the bridge looked toward the same direction, toward the small girl sitting quietly near the medical station, Lyra. She sat alone wrapped in a gray blanket, her silver hair still slightly wet from melted frost inside the laboratory chamber. She looked tiny compared to the armed soldiers around her, but every crew member now stared at her like she was a bomb ready to explode. Lyra noticed their fear immediately. Her glowing blue eyes slowly lowered to the floor. "I didn't call them," she whispered softly. Before Elias could answer, the ship suddenly shook violently. Warning alarms exploded across the bridge. "Missiles incoming!" The pilot shouted, outside the main window. Bright blue explosions lit up the darkness of space. The Atlas turned hard to the left while enemy fire crashed against its shields. The entire ship trembled. Crew members struggled to stay standing. Another explosion hit near the engine section. Smoke burst from several control panels, shields dropping. Someone yelled. Elias immediately grabbed the nearest communicator. "All combat teams prepare for boarding attack," he ordered. "They want the girl alive." Lyra's face turned pale after hearing that. She slowly backed away from the soldiers around her like a frightened animal. Far away in the ship's lower levels, loud metal crashes suddenly echoed through the hallways. "They're inside!" A voice shouted through the radio. The Hollow Fang mercenaries had already breached the ship. Gunfire erupted across the cruiser. Screams echoed through the communication channels. Elias pulled out his sidearm and looked at Lyra. "Stay close to me," he said firmly. She nodded quickly, trying to hide her fear. The captain led her through the crowded hallways while armed soldiers rushed toward the battle zones. Everywhere they looked, sparks flew from damaged walls and emergency doors slammed shut automatically. Then the shooting suddenly stopped. A strange silence filled the corridor ahead. Elias immediately raised his weapon. Something was wrong, very wrong. Slow footsteps echoed from the darkness, one by one. Armored mercenaries appeared at the far end of the hallway. Tall black armor covered their bodies completely. Their helmets looked like skulls with glowing red eyes, and every rifle pointed directly at Lyra. "There she is," one hunter said coldly. Another laughed softly. "The buyers will pay billions for this one." Lyra grabbed Elias's sleeve tightly. Her hands were shaking badly now. Elias stepped slightly in front of her, protecting her from the guns aimed her way. "She's under my protection," he said. The mercenaries laughed again. She is not a child, their leader answered. She is property. Without warning, the hallway exploded into gunfire. Blue plasma bolts slammed against the walls while Elias and his soldiers returned fire immediately. The corridor filled with smoke, sparks, and screams. One human soldier fell beside Lyra after being hit in the chest. The little girl stared at the blood in horror. Everything around her suddenly became louder. Faster, darker. The frightened voices, the weapons, the death. Something inside her mind began waking up. Every light in the hallway started flickering wildly. The mercenaries noticed too late. Their rifles suddenly jerked upward by themselves. One weapon fired into the ceiling. Another exploded completely inside its owner's hands. The hunters shouted in panic. "She's activating!" One screamed, then the metal walls themselves began bending. Like invisible hands were crushing them. Lyra stood frozen in the center of the hallway, tears falling from her glowing eyes. "I don't want this," she whispered repeatedly. "I don't want this." But her powers continued growing stronger. Suddenly, an entire row of enemy soldiers flew backward violently as invisible force smashed them into the walls. The hallway became silent again. Smoke drifted slowly through the air. Bodies covered the floor. The surviving mercenaries immediately retreated, disappearing into the darkness from where they came. Nobody chased them. The human soldiers simply stared at Lyra in complete fear. Even Elias looked shocked by what he had just seen. Lyra slowly looked down at her own hands. Small tears rolled down her face again. "I hurt them," she whispered weakly. Then she looked at Elias with pure fear in her eyes. "Am I a monster?" For a long moment, Elias said nothing. The frightened crew waited for his answer. Finally, the captain slowly walked toward the terrified little girl. Then he carefully placed his jacket over her shoulders. His voice remained calm and gentle. "No," he said quietly. "A monster would not cry after saving someone, but far away in deep space, hidden inside the darkness behind the stars." One massive alien warship silently watched the Atlas, and deep inside that ship, someone smiled after seeing Lyra alive. The hunt had only just begun. The battle was over, but nobody on the Atlas felt safe anymore. Smoke still drifted through the damaged hallways, while repair drones crawled across broken walls like metal insects. Several crew members were injured, 2 soldiers were dead, and fear had spread through the ship faster than the fire itself. Not fear of the enemy, fear of Lyra. Everywhere she walked, whispers followed her. That girl destroyed trained mercenaries without touching them. She almost tore the ship apart. She isn't human. Lyra heard every word. She sat quietly inside the medical room with her knees pulled against her chest, while soft rain sounds played through the ship speakers to calm patients. But nothing calmed her mind. She kept remembering the terrified faces of the mercenaries, the screaming, the blood. Her small hand started shaking again, across the room. Captain Elias Ward stood speaking with the ship doctor. The old doctor lowered his voice carefully. "Captain, something is wrong with her brain activity." Elias frowned. "What do you mean?" The doctor turned the screen toward him. Strange waves moved wildly across the monitor, like 2 minds fighting each other. "I scanned her while she was asleep," the doctor explained quietly. "There are separate neural patterns inside her head." Elias looked confused. "Separate?" The doctor nodded slowly. "It's almost like..." He stopped speaking for a second. "Like there are 2 different people living inside her mind." Elias looked toward Lyra immediately. The little girl sat silently near the window, staring into deep space. Small blue lights reflected softly in her glowing eyes. She looked harmless, lonely even. But now Elias remembered what happened during the battle. The sudden violence, the terrifying power, the way the air itself seemed afraid of her. The captain walked toward her carefully. "Lyra," he said gently, "can I ask you something?" She looked up slowly. "Okay." Elias sat beside her. "When the fighting started," he said carefully, "did you feel different?" Lyra became very quiet after hearing the question. Her fingers tightened around the blanket on her lap. Then she whispered something so softly, Elias almost missed it. "She talks to me sometimes." The captain's expression changed immediately. "Who talks to you?" Lyra looked down again. "The other one," she whispered. Cold silence filled the room. Elias stayed calm even though the answer unsettled him deeply. "What other one?" he asked softly. Lyra closed her eyes tightly. "She gets angry when I'm scared." Her breathing slowly became uneven. "She tells me people will always hurt us, so we should hurt them first." The room suddenly felt colder. Elias exchanged a worried glance with the doctor nearby. "Did the scientists create her?" Elias asked carefully. Lyra nodded weakly. "They said she was stronger than me." "Who?" Elias asked. The little girl slowly touched the side of her head. "The monster inside me." Before Elias could answer, the entire ship suddenly shook hard again. Warning alarms flashed across the ceiling. "Captain to bridge, immediately." A crew voice shouted through the speakers. Elias rushed out of the medical room while Lyra followed close behind him. When they reached the bridge, panic had already spread across the crew again. "What happened?" Elias demanded. The radar officer looked pale. "We intercepted a transmission from the enemy fleet," he answered nervously. The main screen changed instantly. A strange alien face appeared through heavy static. Tall, thin, and covered in dark markings across pale skin. Its black eyes stared directly through the screen, then directly at Lyra. "There you are," the alien said calmly. Several crew members raised weapons immediately, but the alien simply smiled. "You took something that belongs to us." It continued. Lyra suddenly froze beside Elias. Her face turned white with fear. Elias noticed immediately. "You know him?" Lyra whispered only one word. "Creator." The bridge became completely silent. The alien on the screen leaned slightly closer. "She was never meant to survive this long," he said. Then his smile slowly disappeared. "She was designed to destroy civilizations, not hide behind humans pretending to be a child." Anger spread across Elias's face. "She is a child," he answered coldly. The alien laughed softly. "No, Captain," he replied. "She only looks like one." Suddenly the screen flickered violently. Lyra grabbed her head in pain, stumbling backward. A loud ringing sound filled the bridge. Crew members covered their ears while lights exploded overhead. Then a second voice echoed through the speakers. A child's voice, cold, angry, dangerous. "Let me out." Everyone froze instantly. Lyra screamed and collapsed onto the floor, holding her head tightly. "No," she cried desperately. "Stop talking." The deep voice returned again, louder this time. "They are afraid of us. Just like the others." Metal around the bridge started bending slowly. Windows cracked, screens shattered. Several soldiers aimed weapons at Lyra in panic. Elias immediately stepped in front of her. "Stand down," he shouted. "But sir," I said, "stand down." The crew hesitated, but slowly lowered their rifles. Lyra looked up at Elias through tears for one terrible second. Her glowing eyes turned completely red, not blue, red. A voice different from hers whispered quietly from her mouth, "You cannot protect them forever." Then suddenly everything stopped. The lights stabilized, the ringing vanished, and Lyra collapsed unconscious into Elias's arms. Silence filled the bridge once again. Nobody moved, nobody spoke, because now every single person on the ship understood the horrible truth. The greatest danger on the Atlas was not chasing them through space. It was already aboard the ship. Nobody slept after what happened on the bridge. Fear moved through the Atlas like poison. Crew members avoided the hallways near Lyra's room. Some soldiers demanded she be locked away. Others wanted her thrown into space before the other thing inside her woke up again. Only Captain Elias Ward refused to abandon her. Outside the ship, endless stars stretched across the darkness while the damaged cruiser slowly traveled toward the nearest human colony for emergency repairs. A mining world called Haven 12, small, crowded, and poor, but safe. At least that was the plan hours later. The Atlas finally landed inside the colony's giant steel hangar while repair teams rushed toward the damaged ship. The moment the doors opened, tired workers stopped and stared at the deep burn marks covering the cruiser. Something terrible had happened out there, and they could feel it. Elias walked through the busy station beside Lyra while armed guards followed carefully behind them. The little girl stayed close to him the entire time, holding the edge of his coat quietly like she was afraid he might disappear. Her glowing eyes moved nervously across the crowded colony streets. Children played near food markets, workers laughed together, music echoed from nearby shops. Lyra stared at everything in silent amazement. She had never seen normal life before, never seen families, never seen people smiling. A small boy accidentally bumped into her while running through the crowd. He stopped immediately after noticing her glowing eyes. For one awkward second, both children simply stared at each other. Then the boy smiled innocently. "Cool eyes," he said before running away again. Lyra stood frozen in shock. Nobody had ever smiled at her before. Elias noticed the expression on her face. "What is it?" he asked softly. She looked up at him carefully. "He wasn't scared," she whispered. Before Elias could answer, loud engines suddenly roared overhead. Several black military transports descended into the colony hangar at once. The mood around them changed instantly. Colony workers stepped back nervously while armed soldiers marched out of the ships in perfect formation. At the center walked a tall woman wearing dark officer armor, Commander Vera Kane, cold eyes, sharp voice, no patience. The moment she saw Lyra, her expression hardened. "So the rumors were true," she said. Elias crossed his arms immediately. "You came fast. The moment your distress signal mentioned a biological weapon, I had no choice," Vera answered. Lyra lowered her head after hearing those words. "Weapon, not child, not girl, just weapon." Vera stepped closer and studied Lyra carefully. "She doesn't look dangerous," one soldier muttered behind her. Lyra quietly whispered, "They always say that first." Elias noticed Vera's hand slowly resting near her sidearm. "She stays under my protection," he warned firmly. Vera looked directly at him. "For now." The colony governor allowed the Atlas crew temporary shelter while repairs continued. But rumors about Lyra spread through Haven 12 within hours. People whispered about the glowing-eyed child, about the dead mercenaries, about the ship nearly destroyed from the inside. Fear grew quickly, and fear always needed someone to blame. Later that night, Elias finally found Lyra in a lower market district. Rainwater slowly dripped through the old metal ceiling while neon lights reflected across the wet streets below. She sat quietly beside a broken service robot, staring into the darkness. "You disappeared," Elias said calmly while approaching her. Lyra did not look at him. "I heard them talking," she whispered. Her voice sounded small, fragile. "They think I'm dangerous." Elias stayed silent for a moment. Then he sat beside her on the cold metal stairs. "They're afraid," he admitted. "They should be." Lyra answered quickly. Her hands tightened together. "I almost hurt everyone again." "You stopped yourself," Elias replied. "But what if next time I can't?" Rain continued dripping softly around them. Far away, colony lights flickered through the darkness like tiny stars. Lyra finally looked toward Elias with tears filling her eyes again. "The scientists used to tell me something," she whispered. "What?" "That monsters don't deserve families." Those words hit Elias harder than any weapon ever had. For a second, he saw not a super weapon, not an experiment. Just a lonely little girl carrying pain far too heavy for someone her age. Then suddenly, explosions echoed across the colony. Boom! The ground shook violently. Emergency sirens screamed through the streets while people began running in panic. Above the city, defense towers exploded one after another, sending fire into the night sky. Elias immediately stood up. What the hell was that? Colony soldiers rushed through the streets shouting orders. Then one terrified voice screamed from a nearby communicator. "The systems are attacking U.S." Automated defense drones suddenly turned against civilians. Turrets opened fire across the colony without warning. Chaos erupted everywhere. People screamed and ran for cover while sparks rained from burning buildings. Several armed guards nearby immediately looked toward Lyra. Fear filled their faces instantly. "It's her," one whispered. Another soldier raised his rifle. "She's controlling the machines." Lyra stepped backward in horror. "No," she whispered shakily. "I didn't do this." But nobody listened anymore. Within seconds, More soldiers surrounded the alley with weapons aimed directly at her. Citizens screamed angrily from nearby streets. "Get rid of the monster! She brought this here!" Lyra's breathing became faster and faster. Fear, panic, noise, screaming. The same feelings that always woke the darkness inside her. Her glowing eyes flickered dangerously between blue and red. Elias immediately stepped in front of her again, shielding her with his own body. "No one touches her," he said coldly. "Captain, move aside." One guard warned. Elias never moved. Behind him, Lyra grabbed the back of his coat tightly with shaking hands. Her voice barely came out above the chaos around them. "Why are you still helping me?" she whispered. Elias looked back at her softly, because even now, after all the fear, all the destruction, all the danger, he still saw only a child, and this time, he finally said the words she had needed to hear her entire life. "You are not my weapon," he said quietly. "You are my daughter." The entire colony of Haven 12 had fallen into chaos. Fire burned across the metal streets while broken defense drones flew wildly between buildings, attacking everything they saw. Sirens screamed nonstop through the night. Families hid inside underground shelters. Soldiers fired desperately at machines that were once built to protect them. And in the middle of it all stood a terrified little girl. Lyra's glowing eyes flickered between blue and red, while invisible energy shook the air around her. The crowd surrounding her slowly stepped backward in fear. Nobody saw a child anymore. They saw a disaster waiting to happen. "Captain, move away from her now," Commander Vera Kane shouted. Dozens of rifles remained pointed directly at Lyra. Elias Ward stood in front of her without moving an inch. "She's losing control," one soldier warned nervously. "No," Elias answered firmly. "She's scared." Behind him, Lyra held her head tightly while painful voices echoed inside her mind. The cold voice inside her had become stronger than ever before. "They hate us," it whispered. "Look at them. They will never accept us." Lyra squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block the voice away. "Stop," she whispered weakly, but the darkness inside her only grew louder. "Protect yourself," the voice continued. "Hurt them before they hurt you." Suddenly, every light around the street exploded at once. Boom! The shockwave knocked civilians to the ground, while nearby vehicles lifted several feet into the air. People screamed and ran. Several soldiers opened fire in panic. Elias immediately turned toward them. "Stop shooting," he shouted, but it was already too late. The sound of gunfire shattered the final control Lyra still had. Her glowing eyes turned completely red. The air around her twisted violently like an invisible storm had awakened. Metal walls bent inward, windows shattered across nearby buildings, and parked transports flipped upside down like toys. One soldier screamed as his rifle flew from his hands and crushed itself against the ground. "Everybody fall back," Vera ordered desperately, but nobody could move fast enough. A giant defense drone suddenly crashed through the smoke overhead, its weapons charging directly toward the crowded street below. The machine prepared to fire, then froze completely in the air. Slowly, the massive drone turned around by itself, its guns now pointed toward the soldiers instead. Fear spread instantly across every face in the street. "She's controlling everything." Someone screamed. Lyra floated slightly above the ground now, surrounded by flickering energy and floating debris. But tears still rolled down her face. Even now, she looked terrified of her own power. "Please," she cried weakly, "run away." The cold voice inside her laughed softly. "Yes," it whispered through her mouth. "Run." Then the drone opened fire. Explosions ripped through nearby buildings while civilians scattered in panic. Elias grabbed Vera and pulled her behind cover just before plasma fire destroyed the street beside them. "We have to stop her," Vera shouted over the chaos. Elias looked toward Lyra through the smoke and fire. No, not Lyra. Whatever was controlling her now, still. He could see it, deep behind the glowing red eyes. The real Lyra was still there, frightened and trapped. Then suddenly Elias remembered something the doctor once told him. Separate neural patterns. Two minds fighting each other. A dangerous idea formed instantly in his head. He grabbed Vera's communicator. "I need access to the colony neural lab now," he ordered. Vera stared at him like he had gone insane. "You can't seriously be thinking about connecting your mind to that thing?" "It's not a thing," Elias answered sharply. "It's a child." Another explosion shook the colony behind them. Vera cursed under her breath, then finally activated her radio. "Prepare the neural chamber," she ordered reluctantly. "And pray this works." Minutes later, inside Haven 12's underground research center, alarms echoed through the walls while scientists rushed around in panic. At the center of the room stood an old neural interface machine, designed for memory transfers and deep mind communication. Elias sat down in the metal chair while technicians connected wires to his head carefully. "You understand this could kill you?" One scientist warned nervously, "If her mind rejects yours, your brain could collapse instantly." Elias looked through the glass window toward Lyra. She floated outside above the burning colony while storms of energy destroyed everything around her. But even now, she still looked alone. "I'm going in," Elias said quietly. Moments later, the machine activated. Bright white light flooded Elias's vision. Then suddenly, silence. The burning colony disappeared. The laboratory vanished. Everything became dark. Cold black emptiness stretched endlessly in every direction. Elias slowly stood up inside the strange world. "Lyra?" He called carefully. No answer. Only darkness. Then far away, he finally saw something small sitting alone in the distance. A little girl. Lyra sat curled up on the ground surrounded by endless shadows. Thousands of whispering voices echoed around her like ghosts. Monster, weapon, destroyer, failure. The voices never stopped. Lyra covered her ears tightly while tears rolled down her face. Elias slowly walked toward her through the darkness. The whispers immediately turned toward him now. "She will kill you too," they hissed. "Leave her. She cannot be saved." But Elias kept walking anyway. Finally, Lyra looked up at him with frightened eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered weakly. Elias knelt beside her calmly, despite the darkness surrounding them. "I came to bring you home," he said softly, "for the first time since all of this began." The frightened child inside the darkness finally reached toward him. The moment Lyra touched Elias's hand inside the darkness, the entire world around them began shaking violently. The endless whispers suddenly turned into screams. Black shadows twisted across the empty space like living smoke, while cracks of red light spread beneath their feet. Something inside Lyra was furious, very furious. "She belongs to us," the deep voice thundered across the darkness. Elias immediately pulled Lyra closer beside him while the ground beneath them continued breaking apart. The frightened little girl trembled violently. "She found me," Lyra whispered. "Who?" Elias asked. Before she could answer, the shadows ahead slowly began taking shape. A tall figure emerged from the darkness, not fully human, not fully machine. Its body looked broken and unfinished, covered with metal wires and glowing red energy, but the face looked exactly like Lyra, only older, colder, crueler. The creature smiled slowly. "You always were the weak one," it said softly. Lyra immediately stepped backward in fear. Elias understood instantly. This was the second mind, the monster created inside her. "You are not real," Lyra whispered shakily. The creature laughed. "I am the strongest part of you," it answered. Outside in the real world, Haven 12 continued burning. Defense cannons fired wildly across the colony while civilians escaped toward underground shelters. Above the planet, something even worse had arrived. A massive alien war fleet slowly emerged from hyperspace. Hundreds of black warships filled the sky like a moving wall of darkness. Panic spread instantly through every human communication channel. "It's an invasion fleet," one officer shouted. Commander Vera Kane stared at the scanner in disbelief. "No," she whispered. "They came for the girl." At the center of the enemy fleet floated a giant command ship nearly the size of a city. And inside that ship stood the same alien creator from before, calmly watching Haven 12 below. "She is finally awakening," he said quietly. Back inside the neural world, Elias stepped protectively in front of Lyra while the dark version slowly approached them. "You cannot protect her forever," the creature said, staring directly at Elias. "She was born for extinction." Lyra covered her ears again. "No," she whispered weakly, but painful memories suddenly exploded around them like broken glass. Laboratories, screaming children, scientists forcing experiments onto living subjects, entire planets burning beneath giant warships, and at the center of every vision stood Lyra, older, powerful, unstoppable, destroying everything in her path. Elias realized the horrible truth immediately. The creators never built Lyra to be a soldier. They built her to become a living apocalypse. She saw all this before? Elias asked quietly. The dark creature smiled proudly. "These are not visions," it answered. "They are future memories." Lyra suddenly fell to her knees crying. "I don't want to hurt anyone," she sobbed. The darkness around them instantly became unstable again. The creature's smile disappeared. "You do not get to choose," it hissed angrily. Suddenly, giant chains of black energy burst from the darkness and wrapped around Lyra's arms, pulling her backward violently. Elias grabbed her immediately, trying to hold on. "Let her go," he shouted. The creature's eyes burned bright red. "She belongs to the creators," it growled. At that exact moment, the entire neural world shook from another violent impact. Back in reality, the alien war fleet had opened fire on Haven 12. Massive explosions ripped across the colony's surface, while human defense ships launched desperately into space. But they were hopelessly outmatched. One by one, human ships exploded into fire. The creators had not come to negotiate. They had come to reclaim their weapon inside the colony bunker. Commander Vera watched the destruction helplessly. "We can't stop them," a soldier said fearfully. Vera looked toward the neural chamber where Elias still remained connected to Lyra's mind. Then she made a difficult choice. "Prepare evacuation," she ordered quietly. "What about the captain?" someone asked. Vera stayed silent for several seconds, then finally answered, "If he fails, none of us survive anyway." Back inside the darkness, Elias struggled desperately against the chains pulling Lyra away from him. The creature stepped closer slowly. "You humans are pathetic," it whispered. "You see kindness as strength." The chains tightened harder around Lyra while tears streamed down her face. Then suddenly, Elias looked directly at her and spoke calmly. "Lyra," he said firmly. The little girl looked toward him weakly. "You decide who you are," he continued. "Not them," the dark creature screamed angrily. "Lies." But Elias kept talking. "You protected people," he said. "You cried when others suffered. You chose mercy when you had every reason to hate." The darkness around them slowly began shaking again, this time differently. The chains holding Lyra weakened slightly. The creature noticed immediately. "No." It roared. Lyra slowly looked down at her trembling hands. Then for the first time in her life, she made her own choice. Not the scientists, not the monsters. Her own. She stood up slowly. The chains shattered into pieces around her. Her glowing eyes returned to bright blue once again. The creature backed away in shock. "That is impossible," it whispered. Lyra looked directly at it, tears still on her face. "No," she answered softly. "You are the impossible thing." Then the darkness exploded into light. Outside above Haven 12, every machine across the colony suddenly stopped attacking at once. Defense drones powered down. Weapons fell silent. And high above the burning planet, one small figure slowly rose into the sky alone to face the entire alien fleet. A frightened little girl who had finally decided what she wanted to become. The sky above Haven 12 was no longer a sky. It had become a battlefield. Hundreds of alien warships filled the orbit like a dark ocean of steel. Plasma fire lit up the atmosphere in violent waves while human defense fleets burned one by one trying to resist. The colony below was silent now, burning, broken, but silent. Inside the neural chamber, alarms were screaming nonstop while Elias Ward's body remained connected to Lyra's collapsing mind space. His heart rate was unstable, his breathing weak. Technicians shouted warnings. He's losing neural stability. Disconnect him now. But Commander Vera Kane stood frozen, watching the monitors. If they disconnected Elias now, Lyra would be alone again inside her mind. And this time, there might be no return. Outside, the real Lyra had risen into the sky. Her small body floated above the burning colony, while massive alien ships surrounded her from all sides. At the center of the enemy fleet, the Creator watched carefully. "This is it," he said calmly. "She will either become what we designed, or be erased." Lyra's glowing blue eyes scanned the fleet slowly. She looked tiny compared to the giant warships around her, but the space itself seemed to react to her presence. Electric waves moved through the air without sound. Weapons across multiple ships began charging automatically, and then the attack began. Thousands of plasma beams fired toward her at once. The sky turned white with destruction, but Lyra raised her hand gently, and everything stopped. The beams froze in midair, suspended like glowing threads in space. Entire warships shook as their systems failed instantly. Inside enemy control rooms, alarms exploded everywhere. "What is happening?" One alien commander shouted. "She is overriding ALL systems." But Lyra was shaking, not from power, from pain. Inside her mind, Elias was still there, his voice weak but steady. "Lyra, don't let them control you." The connection between them was breaking, but she could still hear him. The Creator's voice echoed again through the battlefield. "You cannot save them all," he said coldly. "You were built to end them." Lyra closed her eyes tightly. For a moment, memories returned again. The laboratory, the experiments, the fear, the monster inside her trying to rise again. But this time, something was different. She was not alone anymore. She remembered Elias's words. "You are my daughter." Her eyes opened again, bright with emotion. "No," she whispered. "I choose." The space around her exploded with light. A massive shockwave spread across orbit, knocking entire warships off balance. Enemy weapons shut down instantly, one after another. The fleet began collapsing into chaos inside the command ship. The Creator finally stepped forward in anger. "Activate full control protocol," he ordered. "Force her obedience." But nothing responded. Every system he built had gone silent. Lyra was no longer responding to commands. She was rewriting them on the surface below. Elias suddenly gasped inside the neural chamber. His eyes opened. "Captain!" Vera shouted. Elias sat up slowly, disoriented. "Lyra!" he whispered. Then he looked at the sky above Haven 12. Through the damaged roof of the colony, he saw it. A small glowing figure standing against an entire alien fleet, still fighting alone, but no longer afraid. Inside the battlefield above, Lyra floated forward slowly. Each step in the air caused ripples through space itself. She stopped at the center of the enemy formation. The Creator's voice came again, but this time it sounded uncertain. "You cannot exist outside control," he said. Lyra looked directly at his flagship. "I am not your weapon," she replied softly. Silence spread across every channel. Even the warship stopped firing. Then she said the words that changed everything. "I am not your creation anymore." For a moment, nothing happened. Then every system in the alien fleet shut down at once. Ships went dark. Engines failed. Weapons deactivated. Entire warships drifted helplessly in space like dead metal. Panic spread through enemy ranks. "We've lost control. She's taken everything." The Creator stared in shock as his entire empire collapsed in seconds. "No," he whispered. Below, the human fleet watched in silence, unable to believe what they were seeing. A child had ended a war that entire civilizations could not win. Lyra slowly turned her head toward Earth's direction. For the first time, she was not scared, not controlled, not broken, just alive. Her voice echoed softly across all human channels. "I don't want to be a weapon," she said. "I want to stay." On Haven 12, Elias stepped outside the damaged colony and looked up at her. His voice was quiet but full of emotion. "You already stayed," he said. Lyra's glowing light slowly faded as she descended from the sky. The battle was over. The fleet was defeated. The monster inside her was gone, and when she finally landed beside Elias, she didn't speak for a moment. She simply looked at him like a child who had finally found something she never thought she would have. A home. Elias knelt down slowly. The great captain of warships, the man who faced death countless times, now looked at her like a father. Lyra whispered softly, "Did I do it right?" Elias smiled gently. "Yeah," he said. "You did, and for the first time in her life." Lyra smiled back, not as a weapon, not as a project, but as a daughter of humanity.